Thank you for joining us. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. For those of you who really enjoy a really good hobby, one of the things you might tend to do is be able to gaze out into space through a telescope. We find that a lot of people find that when they come to astronomy, sometimes just looking at the stars or perhaps gazing at a planet is just something of fascination to make us realize that we're just simply not alone here in the universe. But what if we start to get into a rapid way of discovering even more about our universe than we ever do before? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is author of the new book, A Grand and Bold Thing. It's an extraordinary new map of the universe ushering in a new era of discovery. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, science writer Ann Finkbeiner, who's going to be talking to us about something very fascinating, which gives us more of a three-dimensional approach to a new sort of astronomy, simply known as the Sloan Digital Sky Survey. Ann Finkbeiner, thank you for joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today.
Well, I'm enjoying it already.
Well, tell us what it is that's really changed by the Sloan Digital Sky Survey and how this all came about.
Well, it's sort of changed for two different groups of people. And one of them is professional astronomers, and I can talk about that. But the other one is for the rest of us, because this was a survey of the sky that was done digitally, so like with your little telephone cameras, only these were great big chips. And so it's, everything in a reasonable fraction of the sky. It was all put into a public database, and number one, you can use it if you can figure out a few things that are a little hard to figure out, but you can figure them out. But the other thing is that there's a website called Galaxy Zoo, where you can actually, just take a little online learning thing, which is actually a lot of fun to do. You can actually help astronomers do astronomy with this database from this survey. Really nice. It's really nice.
So it really helps people who may be, as you're saying, a little more amateur to really understand astronomy better than before?
Yeah. Let me tell you about Galaxy Zoo, unless you want to hear more about the survey itself.
You go ahead. Just kind of run with it a little bit here.
Well, I'm thinking about, who your audience must be and what they must be interested in. And so this Sloan Digital Sky Survey that I wrote the book about is actually just a couple of astronomers that got together, and all of a sudden the whole thing got bigger than they were, and they had to get a lot more money and a lot more people, and they ran into management problems, and then they just kept at it, and it made the first big believable survey of the sky, and the whole thing is public. So what they did was, there are basic, the thing that I think your readers might be most interested in is this Galaxy Zoo website. And so what happened was, there were a couple of astronomers who wanted to find a sample of a certain kind of galaxy, certain shaped galaxy, called an elliptical galaxy because they're shaped like ellipticals. And computers are really, really bad at sorting through a million galaxies, and this is what it was. They're really, really bad at sorting through galaxies for shape. And humans are superb at that. So these astronomers who wanted to find these elliptical galaxies put all million galaxies on a website in a database, and opened it up and asked people, the British, told people on the BBC about it, there was a little interview, and I think within 24 hours there were like 10,000 people on this site saying, this galaxy is a spiral, this galaxy is an elliptical, this galaxy doesn't look like anything. And that website has gone on now. And these are ordinary people. These are people with no astronomy training at all. They're just like, as you said, looking at the stars.
Mm-hmm.
So that website's going on for years now. It's up to 300,000 people, and they're looking not just at spiral and elliptical galaxies anymore, but at some of the Hubble galaxies that are very, very, very far away to see what kinds they might be. Galaxies that are running into each other, looking at solar flares, that come off the sun.
Now,
supernovas.
Okay.
All kinds of things.
Now, what was interesting is that when you talk about in your book about, for instance, things such as the Hubble Space Telescope, is that although it can give us great views of deep space, it sort of seemed limited, as though we were taking a look at space in fractured, segmented ways, whereas this new approach really gave us more of an overview of how the universe is born and pretty much how it works in many ways. Why is that important?
It's, I think that's one of the things I like best about this subject. It's not at all important. It will never matter.
Except for the people who really enjoy gazing out into space.
Exactly. So, it's like people who like looking at art and people who like, studying philosophy. It's just, it's something that gives life richness and meaning and pleasure and makes you feel like you're part of something bigger. But it doesn't matter. It's not going to make anybody any money. So it matters, it matters to the astronomers, actually, because they, as you said, the surveys that they had, a lot of the observations that they had before were, I guess what I think of as piecemeal. It's like patches, and if you want to see the whole quilt, you have to put all the patches together. And that's not to take anything away from them, because those patches have been amazingly informative, and they're really beautiful. But the last survey of the sky, where you just said, I'm going to take a picture of everything that's out there, period. That's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to look at any one thing. I'm just going to take a picture of everything. Was done, I don't even know how many years ago, and it was done with photographic plates. And this was the first time a survey had been done digitally, meaning you download it into your computer. And then, you log onto your computer and get into it. So anybody with access to the Internet can use it. So that plus, for me, I was really interested in what it takes to do something this big and this important. This wasn't done by any big corporation with big money behind it. This was done by a bunch of guys who just built their own instruments and raised money and got their friends to help them, and so it was a really nice human story as well.
I think what's really interesting, especially when it comes to science, is people don't understand just how interesting it can really become with people trying to position themselves in discovery, taking credit for things that they've actually come across. And as you were saying here, this wasn't something that had a huge budget, but in some ways it could be considered, quite a bit, which is about $85 million over about 10 to 15 years, as you describe in the book. And but it could have been a lot more, but a lot of these scientists who were involved in this project were actually giving a lot of their time for free, because most of them were employed by universities. So you can see how the passion for a particular project like this comes through, and people would say, but does it matter, as you mentioned earlier? Well, it really doesn't. But to these guys here, this is really a labor of love. So you get some really interesting characters that are involved in a story like this.
Oh, absolutely. I think, this is my own theory, but I think in some ways they're interested in astronomy for the same reasons that people are interested in religion. they're looking for origins. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for, our real context. We live in this world, but it's just one world, and there's lots of them out there, and it's a big universe, and they're just really interested in where we ultimately live and, what to make of all of that. And so I think it's just a beautiful thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I was never any good at math, so I can't do it.
Now, this was also a project that was really it was a collective effort from science from around the world, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it started with one guy and one idea for a particular kind of camera. And, and then he hooked up with a couple of other guys, and then they decided they needed even some more people because it looked like this might take some more manpower and money than the three of them had. And then there were I don't know, I'm going to say 14 guys altogether at first. And now I don't even know how big it is. It's hundreds of people. And it's international universities and consortiums all over the world. Huge now.
Mm-hmm. So how much deeper did this Sloan survey actually take us into space versus where we were before?
That's a nice question. It didn't take us much deeper into space. The Hubble Space Telescope takes us about as deep as we can go in, the wavelengths that we see in. And then other infrared space telescope, one called the Spitzer, is the one I'm thinking about, can take us even further. I mean, really, really, really deep. But, practically back to, the beginning of galaxies. But those observations, those pictures, taken in a patch of the sky like a grain of sand held out at arm's length or something. They are so tiny. And the way I think of a survey is, so the Sloan Digital Sky Survey takes us only about halfway as far back as those other more detailed observations, deep observations take us. The way I think of a survey is, it's like if you run across a city and it's full of aliens from another planet, and you really want to know not what one alien looks like, but you want the demographics of them. How tall are they in general? What color are they? What, how does one start out as a baby and grow into an adult, and how do they die? And and that's what a survey does. It gives you demographics of the universe, which is something that the Hubble images never can. Beautiful as they are, I love them.
Now, what's really interesting for our listeners out there is to understand the importance of the shapes of galaxies versus the possibility of whether or not there is that intelligent life somewhere else other than here. The Milky Way, though, being a spiral galaxy, is, one of the largest, if not the largest that we're aware of. And as I understand, spiral galaxies tend to be the most highly ordered, and then as you move to the other types, there was one that I remember had a name such as Sombrero Galaxy, and I thought, Sombrero Galaxy, that's kind of crazy, but describe through this what they came to discover of the types of galaxies. As you were saying in here, there was a total of, more than 1 million galaxies that were discovered on this survey here, and then they put it into the website, as you mentioned earlier, Galaxy Zoo. And this really takes things to a whole new level when it comes to understanding our universe, it sounds like.
Yeah, there's sort of two answers to that. Again, it's the astronomy answer and then the general public answer. Astronomers have always known that there are just generally 3 shapes to galaxies. One is a general spiral shape, and there are variations within those, but general spiral, generally elliptical, and then something that they are happy to call irregular, which means it's a mess. They don't know what it looks like.
Right.
But it's not very orderly. So one of the things that the astronomers did with this survey was figure out that, because they had the statistics to do this for the first time, that if a galaxy is elliptical, that generally means its stars are very old and very red, that it is very, very big, and that it, what else went along with those? And then if a galaxy was a spiral, it was probably a young galaxy. It probably hadn't formed that long ago, and its stars were generally going to be blue, and it was generally going to be small. The big, old elliptical galaxies were generally around other galaxies. The young, small blue spirals generally lived by themselves. They hadn't known that about the universe before.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the public is concerned, the Galaxy Zoo, they have they have something they call the Irregulars Project, in which they're trying to find the irregulars and see what they have in common. And one of the they call them zooites. One of the zooites found a galaxy that he said, as a little joke, looked like a green pea. It was a little round green galaxy. There aren't many green galaxies. Galaxies are usually red or blue. And so he asked for the other zooites to look for other green pea galaxies, and they found a whole population of them that astronomers hadn't known were there at all. Now, it turns out that there aren't very many of them, and they're not terrifically important in the scheme of things. But it's so nice that this was found by the public, and that they are an unusual kind of galaxy. They seem to be forming stars very, very, very fast, but they're kind of round, and so usually round elliptical galaxies, what the red ones mean is that their stars are pretty dead, not, all alive and forming stars, making babies. So they found a very unusual kind of galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And they still call them green peas.
Mm-hmm. Now, how is this, if it has in fact changed the cosmology of how we understand the universe?
I'm gonna kind of go out on a limb here about that. If so a survey ends up then, being in this database, which is a way to think of a library. It's an organization of information. And you can go into that library and you can use that data to study anything you want to. You can study stars, you can study our galaxy, study other galaxies, you can study massive black holes, you can study anything. So, but your question was about what have they learned about the universe in general, sort of the history of the universe in general. And that's where I kind of go out on a limb, because they don't actually say this, but nobody's told me I was wrong when I've said it. So I think it's kind of true that maybe for the first time they're getting a sense of the universe as it has evolved. It started out at a certain point in time, and it grew up, and it's been changing, and it's getting older now, and they really have a sense of that history, of how it changed and what happened in it. So basically, it's just like human lives. It started out extremely lively and intense and creative and full of beans and very, very, very energetic. and it's gradually been getting older and further apart, and tireder,
Mm-hmm.
less energy, and one of these days we'll run out of the stuff that makes stars.
So it's not as infinite sometimes as we think it is, or maybe it's more infinite than we really know, but the Sloan survey certainly has put things into perspective.
Yeah, I think it really has.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's infinite enough for us,
Right. I think one of the most interesting things about reading this book is it talks about science and how political sometimes it really can be. You're either positioning yourself for the next newest discovery to slap your name on it, or you're realizing, well, maybe I had to just kind of stay out of this for staking my reputation in the first place, as you said, going out on a limb. But this is something that actually occurs quite a bit on something like this.
Yeah, and in some ways that's been one of the big impacts of the Sloan survey too. In fact, it's the part that really got me interested in the first place. Was that astronomy had always been very sort of lone cowboy. You just go out there with one or two of your friends and you make your mark. And you become famous for discovering a couple of really wonderful things and explaining them. And the way I found out about this survey was that one of these guys, who was extremely famous, just sort of went off radar. And I happened to go to a talk that he gave, and afterwards I asked him why I just hadn't seen him running around being famous lately. And he said, well, I've been working on this survey. So what you do when you work on a survey is, you work for other people's benefits for 15 years of your life. And by that time, you're old and you're not doing astronomy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And an awful lot of people have given, astronomers have given huge parts of their professional lives to this survey. And it is almost altruistic because they put together the survey and then they turn it over to the public. Now, they can use the data too, but, wouldn't it have been smarter for them to just sit around and get famous doing something else for 15 years and then once that data becomes, somebody else does the work, go use the data themselves to become famous again? Right?
Like a lot of universities, in other words. A good thesis.
Yep.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my label on that and put a patent on it.
Yep, exactly. Or wait for somebody else to do the hard work and then jump in at the end and say, now that you've made the data free, I'm using it. So, and then, people did do that. But the Sloanies, the people that put together the survey, they were a different breed of. They just did it differently.
Nothing like altruism in science to keep things moving forward, huh?
Yeah. Now there's plenty of incentives. You get famous among your fellow scientists. You get a university salary, and that can be tied to how much you publish, how well you're doing. But it's not like anybody is going to go off and be Donald Trump or something. They're never going to make vast amounts of money. Mm-hmm. They're rarely going to be vastly famous. In the country, I guess Carl Sagan was the last person that did that. So, in a lot of ways, science is kind of an altruistic thing to go into, which is not to say it's not extremely competitive. Those are competitive guys. Mm-hmm. But they manage to be competitive in a very cooperative way. It all just works really interestingly.
Now, A Grand and Bold Thing is the title of the book. Our guest joining us today, Ann Finkbeiner. Now, if people have read this book here, what have been some of the reactions as far as from people who might be considered amateurs, or maybe they just kind of stumbled across this book and they really didn't have a real I guess, interest in astronomy, but perhaps it changed them. Have you seen those kinds of things happen?
Well, it's only been out for about a week, so I haven't heard that.
Okay.
But the thing that I like to hear most from people who read stuff that I write is, oh, that wasn't hard.
Mm-hmm.
That was really interesting. What those guys are doing is really neat. I love it when people say that. But so far, the feedback from astronomers has been very positive.
Now, Ann, is there a website people can find out more about your work and this Sloan Sky Survey?
Well, there's galaxyzoo.org. That's all one word, galaxyzoo.org. There is, my website is annfinkbeiner.com. And then there's a website that it's a blog that I'm a co-blogger on that I think is a lot of fun. It's called The Last Word on Nothing. And just Google Last Word on Nothing, and you'll find it. So those are basically it. And there's another one that's called skyserver.org. That's the Sloan's website.
So as people want to decide, well, this is something I'd like to pursue and learn quite a bit more about, this is a way they can approach that.
Yes, it is. Especially Galaxy Zoo. Yeah.
Galaxy Zoo. And it's been a pleasure to have you on the program today, especially knowing that now we're starting to get the first 3D digital map of the sky for a change, so people can really find out that this place is a lot bigger, but at the same time not as big as we think it is.
Yep. And we're all part of it.
Thank you very much for being with us on the program today.
Well, thank you. It's been fun.
You betcha.
Bye-bye.
We also encourage you, the listeners, to be sure to visit us at our website at beyond50radio.com. We'll post a really neat galaxy there for you as well. Sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter and visit us at our blog. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.